In the past couple months, I read all of Fonda Lee's Greenbone Saga, and I absolutely love these books. In fact, this series has vaulted up my top favorite fantasy series of all time list, and if you want to see where it landed, then tune in.
This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
The majority of this review is going to be no spoilers. At the end, I'm going to do a few spoilers, but I will tell you when that's happening. Mostly, I just want to talk about a few specific things from the series, and since the other Fantology crew has not read it yet, you're stuck with me talking to the microphone for some spoiler stuff. But anyway, okay, what is this series? Why should you care? Etc., etc. So if you're in fantasy circles of any kind, you've probably heard this series discussed as either the Greenbone Saga, which is the correct name, or maybe just like the Jade books, because they're called Jade City, Jade War, Jade Legacy. It's by Fonda Lee. They finished in 2021, so it's fairly recent, and it's got a lot of positive reviews. I'm a little late to the game, honestly. I'm 2 years after the series concluded, and I feel like maybe that was a missed opportunity because, like I said, I really loved the series. So what is it? First and foremost, it's a family crime drama. And it's kind of crime, but really it's mostly just drama. So it's set in this kind of fictionalized real world setting. It takes place roughly from like the 60s to 90s. And there's some events that are pretty analogous to real world events. It kind of starts in the aftermath of World War II. I mean, it has a different name, but and it's mostly set on a country called Janloon, which is basically, fake Japan. And it mostly kind of centers around what's happening over in Asia, in that area between, Japan, China, Korea. They obviously don't have like direct one-to-one comparisons, but that's kind of what it is. And then there are other countries who represent US/Western Europe and Russia. So you'll have some familiarity to what's going on just if you know what happens in real history. So that's a little bit of background, but the heart of the narrative is at the family and character-driven aspects. So Janloon is ruled by two big clans, the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan. And yes, there's like a civil government, but most of the action happens with these two clans. We mostly follow the No Peak clan, and as the story begins, the patriarch of the No Peak clan has gotten older, and he's kind of passing on rule to his children and the next generation. And then it goes from there. There's a big conflict with the Mountain clan that has also recently gone through a change in leadership, and we go through the next like 20 to 30-ish years of history. Most of that historical walkthrough takes place in Jade Legacy, which is different than the first two books. The first two books are pretty straight through in terms of like they maybe take 2 to 3 years, while Jade Legacy spans at least 20-ish years, just kind of estimating here. And we get real acquainted with our main characters in the first two books, and then in the third book, it expands and we go on to essentially the next generation of characters. I found myself getting more and more into the series as the story progressed. I would give the books 7.5 out of 10 for Jade City, 8 out of 10 for Jade War, and then 8.5 out of 10 for Jade Legacy. And I think part of that increasing enjoyment was I just became more and more attached to the characters. And again, that's the strongest part, because these are real people, they're great characters, they have weaknesses and strengths, and they make mistakes, and they just feel like very realized people that could just step off the page. And anytime you can create that as an author, I think you've done a fantastic job. The plot centers around this conflict between the Mountain clan and the No Peak clan, and first and foremost in this conflict is the use and possession of Jade. Jade is a magical resource in this story, and if you possess Jade and use Jade, you are a Greenbone warrior and are stronger, faster. You can cast out things like deflection shields and are in general a big force to be reckoned with. This is why these two clans rule the entire country, is because they have access to Jade and most everyone does not. Additionally, only people from Janloon, natives from Janloon, can really use Jade very well. Later on in the story, there's some ways around this, but for the most part, Jade becomes the center of an international conflict as well, as these other countries, which are a lot larger and have more influence than Janloon, are trying to get access to Jade for different struggles that are going on. And in this way, it really kind of mirrors the Cold War between the Russia and US/Western Europe powers as they're trying to use jade in different ways in order to influence things in different spheres of the world. So you'll feel pretty familiar with what's going on, but with this additional aspect of, okay, jade is kind of powering a lot of the conflict. So that's fun because you can just latch onto the story pretty quickly, but it's also fun to then have, a magical thing inserted into real history. It's a super grounded story in that the prose is not very flowery. It's really kind of told pretty directly. It's pretty easy to access, and it mostly focuses on different characters. You get to know and love these characters that feel really, very real and human, and nothing too, absolutely crazy epic fantasy happens. There's no people in big swords and huge suits of armors flying across the sky doing crazy stuff like you'd see in Stormlight epic fantasy, for example. It feels like it could happen on real Earth, real history, right? Except for obviously these magic powers. So that's where the story really succeeds. However, that's not to say that there's not action scenes, because there absolutely are. As you'd expect with a story that features a group of characters that have magical powers that turn them into basically super ninjas, there's a lot of cool stuff that happens. However, most of the focus and most of the enjoyment that I found was in the devastating gut punches and the fantastic fist pump moments throughout. You never know what's happening next, and you always have to keep on reading to figure out the resolution of the conflicts that just come after you wave after wave. Two comparisons. I feel like Greenbone is kind of a combination between George R. R. Martin's Westeros works in A Song of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood, which is the book that the House of Dragon TV show is based on. The reason being is it's kind of a familial drama with great characters that do wonderful things and terrible things and feel like very real people. It also doesn't pull any punches. Main characters could be offed, but that's just going to be part of the story. The other comparison is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, and that just gives us the, also a very gray story. But that gives us more of the kind of Asian setting and feel to it. And it also has this fake real history. There's a term for this, historical fantasy, something like that, where you have, that story also takes place in kind of fictionalized China with magical powers. And so if you combine those things, you get basically the tone of Song of Ice and Fire taking place in fictionalized Asian culture with very great things happening across the board. So I said a lot of positives there because I am very positive on this series, if you can't tell. But a couple cons. One is it's a lot like those two comparisons in the content level as well. It's a very gray series, and if that turns you off, you might want to be aware of that. And two being, I don't want to say it's a slow start, but it did take me until about halfway through Jade City, the first book, to really feel like I was connected to it and this was going to be an awesome series. And that's because halfway through the switch kind of gets flipped, and the main conflict starts off, and this is the conflict, the big war between the two clans that I described. That's going to be the driving force of the rest of the series. So, that takes a little bit of time. That's understandable. I don't think it's a big negative, but I don't know, if you bounce off series immediately, just be aware to give it a little bit of time. So at the outset, in the hook for this review, I said that I was going to tell you where the Greenbone Saga ranks in my top fantasy series. I'm just throwing out fantasy series that are either completed or very well established to where I feel like I know how much I'm going to enjoy them even at this point. So my number one fantasy series is Stormlight Archive. I know there's only 4 books out and it's supposed to be 10, but I think I'm pretty comfortable. I just love that series. So that's going to be number 1. Number 2 is The Wheel of Time. Both of these series kind of similar feel. It kind of gives you a little bit of a vibe of what series I enjoy. Number 3 is First Law, which goes a lot more on the gray side, but is complete-ish. We'll see if Abercrombie ever comes back, and is just excellently written. Another fantastic character series. And number 4 is the Greenbone Saga. So, really shot up the list very quickly. But for a completed series, there's not a ton of modern fantasy series that I love that are complete. So it's done a great job. The ending of the series really landed, and it comes in at number 4. And number 5, I'm going to say Mistborn, Era 1, Era 2, whatever, just Mistborn in general is my number 5 series. All right, now a few spoiler thoughts for those of you who stuck around and have read the series. If you haven't, go read it now. So talking spoilers, I just want to do two things. One, rank characters, my top 5 favorite characters and a little reason why, and just throw out a few moments that were just mind-blowing and awesome for me and totally made the series. So my number 1 favorite character is Andon. Andon is, like a B tier character. He's not one of the main calls, but he gets a lot of screen time and he does a lot. And I love that his time in Espenia became so vital, and I love his overall arc from where at the beginning, at the end of the first book, he kind of he rejected the Jade and he didn't want to go down that road, but he still has the soul of a Greenbone warrior and is able to do so many positive things for the clan, while representing a lot of the reforms that Lon wanted to have happen, and really just kind of showing what John Loon is becoming now going into the future. And now I honestly kind of regret saying he's a B tier character, because he's not, even though his name is not Call. That's no reason to diss on Andon and call him a B tier character. He's clearly an A tier character, probably an S tier character if I'm giving him my number 1. Number 2 is Shay, for some similar reasons, because I think she also represents the reforms that John Loon is going through as it gets up to modern times here. Every time Shay was on the screen again, I loved it. I loved her arc as she goes from an outcast coming back in, forced into a role that she never wanted to have, and she quickly adapts and becomes very strong. And I love the foil between her and Aitmata and all of the moments, the times that they're in the temple together and kind of have these awesome conversations. And then when she saves Aitmata at the end, and that whole sequence I think was the best in the entire series, with the bombing of the KJA building. I'm kind of spoiling my top moments, but that was the best, because as the reader, you're like, let's do an Aitmata because she's been causing all these problems, but you realize that you can't, because then the entire country's going to fall apart and Espenia is going to come in and take over. And Shay grapples with this and makes the right decision, and then afterwards, when she realizes Hilo's alive and they're in Andon's apartment and she's about to let her walk out, that's another great moment, because it shows who Andon and Shay are as characters and who Aitmata is a character, because then later on, Aitmata does not extend any type of forgiveness or recompense of this honorable behavior. She still doubles down on trying to kill all of the calls, which is appropriate for her character as well. Speaking of, she is my number 3 character, Aitmata, and as I think about her as my number 3 character, it almost makes me wonder or think if maybe the series could have been better if there were more prominent Mountain Clan characters that we followed along. However, I think that's kind of the point thematically, right? Like the No Peak clan was able to eventually prevail because they had the collective family structure and, looking out for each other, the love there within their family, while No Peak the Mountain rather, was ruled by a genius in Aitmata and an awesome character who ruled with an iron fist and was always way ahead of everyone else. However, she could only do it herself for so long and really had nothing by the end, which is a tragedy, but also represents, obviously the themes we're going for here. I thought this is so well put together. Aitmata was not on screen a whole lot. Every time she was, there was just a chilling presence about her. I love that. If they ever make an adaptation, this might be the one that they need to nail more than anything, so you really feel the power on the other side of the struggle. Number 4 is Hilo. Hilo's a character that you love and hate alternatively throughout the series, but I think his entire transformation from bloodthirsty 20-something-year-old as he starts off as the Horn of No Peak to kind of the wise pillar by the end. He still, goes out with a bang, still kind of falls back to violence when he needs to get things done, but he represents a little bit of the old guard still, and I thought the ending was really just perfect. I mean, for as good as the series was, it really tied it up nicely. I think Hilo had to die for this to work out well. It totally made sense. And that whole ending sequence where Hilo was distrusting of the Alliance and thinking that I was not going down with the fight, I was honestly thinking that he was making the wrong move and he needed to move on and this was going to end up being another disaster, but turns out he was right and ended up kind of saving the day at the cost of his own life, and the whole tribute that was then paid to him afterwards was beautiful. So Hilo's my number 4. He was awesome. My number 5 character is Wen. There's a lot of great characters, but I'm just going with 5. And I think part of it was because I identified with her as someone who's disabled, the journey that she goes through at the end of the second book. And that's something that continues to impact her throughout the rest of the third book. I think that was pretty well done. And I liked her character as not a foil, but, someone that Hilo can kind of bounce off of and show both of their characters more as they interact with each other. And someone who prevented the No Peak clan from going down in a fiery hell of destruction with Hilo at the reins. Like, without Wen kind of reining him in, this would not have gone as well as it did. So let me close it off with a few quick hitters, plot events that really struck a chord with me. Lon dying halfway through the first book was huge for the story, had to happen. Really cemented in the seriousness of the conflict between the Mountain and No Peak clans. And I think really, the reason why the book works, the series works as well as it does, is because all the way through, we had this through line of conflict of this is the big war, this is what matters. No matter what the conflict was, no matter what you're reading about at the time, you always have in the back of your mind, this is the big thing that's going on. Kind of like how the Iron Throne conflict permeates every aspect of A Song of Ice and Fire. Similarly done here, and I think this is brilliantly done, and Lon's death starts it off. The ending of the first book is also great, with Andon coming in, saving the day, and then rejecting the Jade. Then rolling into book 2, just Hilo's character throughout, loving and hating him. That was very well done. And then I talked about Shay and Aimata's relationship throughout, but I forgot about the duel in book 2. That part was awesome and really set up the rest of it. The end of book 2 with Andon and Wen, that kind of put a bow around what was happening in Espenia with Andon's plotline, and was really emotionally scarring, as I was concerned that both of those characters or one of them was going to die. I'm glad they both survived that. The best part, like I said, was the bombing of the KJA, best part of the entire series. That was perfectly done. And I'm glad that happened because it gave some point to the whole Barrow plotline. That was my least favorite part of the whole series. I didn't really love whenever he was on screen, but I do get what Fonda Lee was going for with him, especially at the end when you realize that this guy saw the entirety of the story through just a very different lens than the No Peak lens that the reader saw everything through. That was well done. I'm talking about the interaction between Barrow and Nico, but at the same time, those parts were just not as exciting for me, and I always wished we were back at No Peak with whatever was going on there. However, his involvement with the Clanless Future movement and that leading into the KJA was well done, and so I'm glad that happened. When Rue died, that was a real tearjerker for me. I loved Rue. He was an awesome character, very easy to love, and that sucked that he died. That just sucked. And it made sense that it changed Hilo as much as it did. But speaking of Rue, the way that Fonda Lee utilized the third generation of children was really well done, because I think I can't remember any series off the top of my head, but I feel like there's other series where you have kids being born and you're like, okay, that's cool, but what's the point of this child? Because even though, it just seems like they're a plot device of oh, look, there's a child here, so now things are different. However, this was really well done because these characters, Nico and Rue and Jaya, etc., are the future of the clan, and we can see what direction they're going in. And that was something that I haven't seen very often in other places, and I want to see it more now. At first, going into Jade Legacy, I was like, wow, this is really different. I'm not sure if I'm going to like this, but by the end, I think it was very well done. So, bold decision, but one that totally paid off. All right, if you have more thoughts about Greenbone, then hop on our Discord. You can leave a comment here on YouTube, and I'll see that. But if you want to chat more, hop on our Discord. Links are below. Thanks for watching.